It ends 41-34 in Los Angeles, and I already know how this feels for a lot of you watching right now. The record drops to 8-6. Emotions are hot, frustration is real, but I want to slow this down and talk through what actually happened in this game, because if you really watched it snap by snap, this loss tells a much deeper story about where this team truly is right now. I expected Detroit to lose this game. I expected it when the schedule came out. I expected it before kickoff, and I expected it while watching the Rams play like the best team in football at the moment. That doesn't make the loss easier, but context matters, especially when the Lions went on the road and didn't fold. Let's start with the offense, because it deserves real credit. This was not a bad offensive performance. In fact, this was one of the most encouraging offensive stretches we've seen in weeks. Jared Goff played a strong game, throwing for 338 yards and multiple touchdowns, and most importantly, he was protected. That's now 2 straight weeks where the offensive line is held up, and that matters more than almost anything else going forward. When Goff has time, this offense functions, it moves, it scores, and it stays competitive even against elite opponents. The play calling was solid, the passing game was clicking, and despite not being able to run the ball effectively, Detroit stayed aggressive and found ways to move the chains. And let's be clear, this wasn't done with ideal personnel. The Lions are working through injuries, makeshift combinations, and backup tight ends doing everything they can. Miles Frazier getting his second extended opportunity held his own, and that matters in the long view of this season. This offense didn't shrink under pressure, it didn't disappear after falling behind, and it didn't waste possessions. It kept Detroit in this game until the final moments. There were officiating moments that drove everyone crazy, especially the play that should have been ruled down at the 1-yard line instead of a touchdown. That kind of thing cannot happen, and it absolutely disrupts momentum. But even with that said, it's hard to argue that it completely changed the outcome, because the Rams likely score anyway from that position. Still, the frustration is justified. Fans deserve a game that's called cleanly and correctly, especially in matchups like this. Defensively, the story is far more complicated. The defensive line did about as well as you could reasonably expect against a quarterback like Matthew Stafford. Aiden Hutchinson making a play in coverage, creating a turnover, getting pressure, those things matter. There were sacks, there were near sacks, and there was effort. Jack Campbell and Alex Anzalone held their ground in the middle. This was not a defensive front that quit, but the secondary is a massive problem right now, and there's no way around saying it plainly. This unit is depleted, injured, and exposed. Kirby Joseph is out. Brian Branch hasn't been at his best. Terrion Arnold is unavailable. What you're seeing on the field are backups being asked to survive against one of the league's most dangerous passing attacks. And then there's the issue that can't be ignored anymore. DJ Reed is struggling badly. He's being paid like a top-tier corner, and he's getting beaten far too often. Losing Carlton Davis and replacing him with DJ Reed has been a downgrade, and that downgrade is showing up every single week. Whether it's injury rust or confidence, something is clearly off, and it's hurting the defense. Coaching-wise, this was a mixed bag. Dan Campbell called a solid offensive game given the circumstances. Detroit passed when it had to, adapted when the run wasn't there, and stayed competitive. On defense, the regression is obvious. Calvin Shepard has a lot on his plate with this many injuries, but the unit is sliding, and it's becoming impossible to ignore. Adjustments need to come, even if the personnel isn't ideal. Special teams didn't decide the game. Jake Bates missed a field goal, but also made one. The Rams avoided Tom Kennedy on returns, which gave Detroit strong field position consistently, and that was a positive. This loss doesn't fall on special teams. Now the bigger picture. Detroit is 8-6. The path to the playoffs still exists, but it's narrow and unforgiving. If the Lions win their final 3 games, they reach 11 wins. That means beating the Steelers at home, going on the road for revenge against the Vikings, and finishing the season against the Bears. It also means needing help, particularly from Chicago and Green Bay. Green Bay losing recently helps. Detroit hasn't lost back-to-back games since 2022, and that matters mentally heading into next week. This team doesn't need perfection. It needs momentum. The offense is trending upward. The defense needs a spark. Injuries have taken a toll, but effort hasn't disappeared. All Detroit has to do right now is win the next game. Nothing else matters until that happens. So after watching this game, seeing the offense fight, the defense struggle, and the playoff path still barely alive, what do you honestly think this loss says about the Detroit Lions right now? The reality is that everything from this point forward tightens, and that pressure is exactly what defines seasons like this. At 8-6, There's no margin left to waste, but there's also no reason to act like this team is finished or broken beyond repair. What we're watching right now is a Lions team that knows who it is on offense and is desperately trying to survive on defense long enough to let that offense matter. That's not ideal, but it's honest football reality. The encouraging part is that the offensive identity is becoming clearer instead of shakier. The protection up front is stabilizing, and that alone changes the ceiling of this team. When Jared Goff is upright, this offense can trade punches with anyone. We just watched them put up 34 points on the road against a Rams team that is playing as well as anyone in the league. That's not empty production. That's real, functional offense that travels. The Lions didn't luck into yards or scores. They earned them through execution, timing, and confidence. That matters as the season tightens. The frustration, and where fans are right to be angry, is that the defense simply hasn't met the same standard. Injuries explain part of it, but they don't explain all of it. Scheme, communication, and individual execution are all being tested, and too often they're failing at the same time. When you're missing multiple starters in the secondary, you cannot afford your highest-paid corner to struggle. You cannot afford blown coverages, late reactions, and repeated losses on critical downs. Those moments flip games, and they flip this one. Still, it's important to understand what this loss did not do. It did not eliminate Detroit. It did not expose the offense as a fluke. It did not show a team that quit. What it showed was a roster stretched thin in key areas trying to survive against elite competition. There's a difference between being outmatched and being outplayed. Detroit was not embarrassed in Los Angeles. They were competitive, flawed, and short-handed. Now it all funnels into what happens next. The Steelers at home are not unbeatable. That's a game Detroit should expect to win if they're serious about January football. The Vikings on the road will be about response and pride after already losing once. The Bears game at the end of the season could very well carry playoff weight. None of that matters, though, if Detroit doesn't take care of the next snap, the next drive, the next game. This is where leadership shows up. This is where coaching adjustments either happen or don't. This is where players either rise or fade. The Lions don't need miracles. They need consistency, better communication on defense, and continued protection up front. If they get those things, this season is still alive in a very real way. Now it's on you. Do you believe this loss was just a tough road game against a great team, or do you see it as a warning sign about what this Lions team really is as the playoff race tightens? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if you're riding with Detroit through the finish, subscribe to the channel for the next breakdown, and keep watching because the rest of this season is going to tell us everything. What also can't be ignored is how thin the margin for error has become because of how the season unfolded earlier. Every missed tackle, every blown assignment, every stalled defensive series now feels magnified because Detroit no longer has cushion in the standings. That's not panic, that's math. When you're 8-6, every game effectively becomes a playoff game, and the Rams matchup felt like one even if it wasn't officially labeled that way. What stands out to me when I rewatch this game mentally is how often the Lions answered offensively. They didn't let momentum swings bury them. They didn't go 3 and out repeatedly. They stayed aggressive. That tells you something about the locker room. There's belief on that side of the ball. There's trust in the protection, trust in the quarterback, and trust in the play design. You don't see a unit playing scared. You see a unit playing like it knows it has to score, because it can't rely on the defense to bail it out right now. That's a dangerous way to live, but it's also a very clear identity. If the Lions are going to make any kind of run, it's going to be because the offense carries them and the defense finds just enough answers. Not dominance, not shutdown football, just enough stops at the right time. A single turnover, a single third down stop, one red zone hold. That's the difference between being 8-6 and 9-5 right now. And this is where the injuries loom over everything. It's not an excuse, but it is reality. Losing multiple starters in the secondary changes what you can call, how aggressive you can be, and how much you can disguise. Opposing quarterbacks know it. Offensive coordinators know it. They are attacking it relentlessly, and until Detroit proves they can survive those attacks, it will continue. That's the challenge for the coaching staff over these final weeks. Simplify where needed, protect your weakest links, and find ways to steal possessions. There's also something important about expectations that needs to be said plainly. This season was never supposed to be easy. Growth in the NFL is not linear. Teams don't just rise and stay there without resistance. What matters is how you respond when things get uncomfortable. The Lions are uncomfortable right now. They're banged up, they're under pressure, and they're being doubted again. That's exactly the moment that defines whether this core is ready to take the next step or not. Nothing about the Rams' loss says the Lions can't beat the Steelers. Nothing about it says they can't go into Minnesota and compete. Nothing about it says they can't be playing meaningful football in the final week of the season. What it does say is that there is zero room left for self-inflicted wounds. The standard has to rise immediately, especially on defense. This is the stretch where seasons turn into statements. Either this becomes the moment where Detroit steadies itself and pushes forward, or it becomes the moment everyone looks back on and says this is where it slipped away. If you're still here watching, you care, and that's what this team feeds off. So let me hear it from you. How confident are you that the Lions can clean up just enough on defense to let this offense take them into the playoffs? Drop your thoughts in the comments, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and keep this video playing on your screen, because the next few weeks are going to define this entire season. There's also a mental side to this stretch that doesn't show up on the stat sheet, and it's something longtime Lions fans know all too well. This is the part of the season where belief either hardens or cracks. You can feel it in the way players respond after a loss like this. Do they point fingers, or do they lock in? Do they let frustration bleed into the next week, or do they channel it into urgency? Everything about the Rams game suggests this team understands the moment, even if it didn't execute well enough defensively. Look at how composed the offense stayed even when the game tilted against them. There was no visible panic, no sense of unraveling. That's growth. That's a quarterback who knows the system, a line that trusts each other, and skilled players who expect the ball to come their way in big moments. That kind of confidence doesn't disappear overnight, and it's exactly what you need heading into a must-win situation. The defense, on the other hand, is walking a tightrope. Confidence there is fragile, and that's where coaching becomes critical. You can't ask backup players to play like stars, but you can put them in positions where mistakes don't automatically become touchdowns. That's the adjustment that has to happen immediately. Fewer breakdowns, cleaner communication, and smarter situational football. The Lions don't need to dominate defensively, but they do need to stop beating themselves. And here's where the narrative around this team can flip quickly. Beat the Steelers at home, and suddenly the record looks different. Suddenly the conversation shifts from disappointment to opportunity. Win that game, and the pressure transfers to everyone else. Lose it, and the margin vanishes entirely. That's how thin the line is right now. What makes this stretch so compelling is that the Lions still control part of their fate. Yes, they need help. Yes, they need other teams to lose. But none of that matters if Detroit doesn't handle its own business first. Win, and the door stays open. Lose, and it starts to close fast. This is why this Rams loss, as frustrating as it was, isn't the end of the story. It's a chapter, one that exposed weaknesses, highlighted strengths, and set the tone for what's coming next. The offense showed it can fight with anyone. The defense showed it has to grow up fast. And the season showed it's not done yet. What makes this moment so defining is that there are no illusions left. There's no hiding what this team is anymore. The Lions are an offense-first team right now, powered by protection, rhythm, and a quarterback who looks far more comfortable than he did earlier in the season. That's the foundation they're standing on, and it's a real one. You don't accidentally put up 34 points on the road against a team like the Rams. You do that because you can execute under pressure. That should matter to every fan watching this. At the same time, the defense is living on borrowed time. The injuries have stripped away flexibility, and the margin for mistakes is almost non-existent. Every opponent knows exactly where to attack. That doesn't mean Detroit is helpless, but it does mean that the smallest improvements can have outsized impact. One cleaner series, one disguised look, one forced mistake. This defense doesn't need to transform overnight. It just needs to survive long enough to give the offense a chance to decide games. And that's why the next stretch feels heavier than the record alone suggests. This isn't just about wins and losses anymore. It's about whether this core can handle pressure without fracturing, whether the coaching staff can adapt fast enough, whether players who are being counted on step up instead of shrinking. These are the weeks that shape how a team is remembered, not just how a season ends. The Rams game hurt because it was close enough to taste, because the offense did its job, because the path is still there, but narrower. Yet there's something important in that too. The Lions are not chasing miracles. They're chasing execution. They're chasing consistency. And those things are still within reach. Now it all comes down to response. Not talk, not excuses. Response. What shows up next week will tell us far more than what happened in Los Angeles. This team has a chance to redefine the narrative immediately, and that opportunity doesn't come often when you're this late in the season. If you're watching this and you care about where this goes, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, hit that like button to support the content, and keep this video playing on your screen. The next chapter of this season is about to be written, and you won't want to miss what comes next. And that's really the final tension point hanging over this entire stretch of the season. This team no longer has the luxury of figuring things out slowly. Everything has to accelerate. Corrections have to happen midweek, not over a month. Communication on defense has to tighten immediately. Trust has to be rebuilt snap by snap, because the schedule doesn't care how injured you are or how competitive you looked in a loss. What keeps this from feeling hopeless, though, is that the Lions are not being outclassed across the board. They are not getting blown off the field. They are not collapsing mentally. They are losing while still showing signs of structure, fight, and identity. That matters. Teams that completely fall apart don't look like this. They don't answer scores. They don't protect their quarterback. They don't move the ball consistently against top competition. The question now is whether this team can live with its flaws without letting those flaws define every outcome. That's the challenge. You know the defense isn't suddenly becoming elite. You know the secondary isn't magically getting healthy overnight. So the adjustment becomes situational mastery, better third down calls, smarter red zone decisions, limiting explosive plays even if you give up short ones. Those are the margins that decide games in December. From a fan perspective, this is the hardest part to process because it requires patience and belief at the same time. Patience to understand why things look the way they do. Belief to trust that the effort and execution on offense can still carry meaningful games. The Rams' loss didn't kill the season, but it did strip away any remaining comfort. From here on out, everything has weight. This is where leadership inside the locker room matters more than any scheme. Veterans, captains, and coaches have to keep the focus narrow. One opponent, one game plan, one opportunity at a time. The moment you start looking too far ahead, you lose the week you're standing in. And that's why next week isn't just another game. It's a response game. It's a statement game. It's the kind of game that tells everyone, including the players themselves, whether this season still has real life in it or not. Now I want to hear from you. After everything we've broken down, do you still believe this Lions team can rally, clean up just enough defensively, and let the offense carry them into the postseason? Or does this feel like the point where the pressure becomes too much? Drop your thoughts in the comments, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and keep this video playing on your screen, because the story of this season is far from finished. There's one last layer to this that can't be ignored, and it's the emotional toll of playing meaningful football this late into the season. These games feel heavier because they are heavier. Every snap carries consequence. Every mistake feels amplified, and that weight can either sharpen a team or slowly wear it down. What we're about to find out is how this Lions group handles that weight when there's no reset button left. What gives this situation real intrigue is that Detroit has already shown it can respond when backed into a corner. This team hasn't spiraled after losses in the past couple of seasons. It hasn't gone on extended losing streaks. It has found ways to stabilize. That history matters, even if the circumstances are different now. Confidence doesn't come from words. It comes from lived moments, and this locker room has been through enough adversity to understand what's required.
At the same time, this is where details decide everything. A missed assignment that turns into a 40-yard gain. A third and long that doesn't get off the field. A red zone trip that ends in 3 instead of 7. These are no longer small mistakes. These are season-defining moments, and that's the reality the Lions are living in right now. The Rams' loss didn't expose a lack of talent on offense. It exposed how little room there is when one side of the ball can't hold up its end consistently. That doesn't mean it's over. It means the standard